I think it goes back to that word traditional. That is a term that sort of has been applied to us from the outside, and sort of, yeah, it has. It's a byproduct, I think, of sort of being studied, and being categorized and all of that, by anthropologists over the years, so that now there's a category of, sort of static, um, activities, objects, things like that that are attributed to us. And so that kind of static, um, sort of, parameter is, it does contribute to sort of the invisibility piece, in that, you're expected, you know you're expected to, sort of carry certain information, actions, etc., um, based on someone else's, perception of what's authentic for you. Um, and we use traditional in our communities. We use that term, but we use it differently. It does refer to things that are older, that are sort of actions, objects, again, ways of creating objects, that we use, that are from the past. But even when you go back to that past, you saw that they were innovating all the time with these objects, with their ways of creating them. Glass beads are a classic example of that. Those didn't come from us. We didn't create glass beads. We traded for them, but we did recognize their power, their creative power and other power. And we were able to harness that power so well that now anything that's glass beaded has triggers, this sort of Native American connection. So yeah, I think invisibility, it is a part of that, someone else's, assessment of the term traditional and authentic. And within our community, within my community, it's used differently. We use that term differently to sort of distinguish between, older objects, older practices that need to be protected, that need to be preserved, but we don't hold back this development, this innovation that we've always had. I mean, you see it in powwow. I just came from the Fourth of July powwow, and you know, you have traditional men's and women's dancers. Their outfits are very much connected to the past, and there's a real push to make them as close to what might have been made in the past as possible, and that's a real premium and a real priority. And then on the other end, you have the fancy dancers, fancy shawl, fancy feather. There is some, sort of things, protocols, but it's pretty wide open. So it's a great metaphor, I think, for kind of the how living culture stays a living culture. Um, through this kind of through this sort of taking control of your own identity, your own narrative. We've still got control of it. So, well, our existence and our sort of our the images of us, everything sort of that surrounds identifying us, has at one point in time been propagandized. So, um, those images. There's a really terrific show that saw years ago called, gosh, what was it called? Anyway, this great show that sort of helped me understand the categories of propaganda that were created. Um, and there's this sort of noble savage, when contact was first made, these images that were coming out, Catlin, people like that. And then the middle period was sort of this bloodthirsty savage that was being depicted by different artists and Remington and people like that. And then this vanishing Indian, at the end of the sort of Indian Wars. Um, and so those categories were very real categories, and they were there for different reasons. Um, and the first was to sort of categorize us as a powerful people, but also sort of undeveloped. So it was fitting into these theories of man at the time, romanticist theories about the development of man. We were an early stage in that development, so they applied that, using nobility, that framework of nobility, and then when it came time to, when they really pushed to take all the land, there was, and Manifest Destiny became the sort of battle cry. Then we became the bloodthirsty savage. And there was a lot of words and images out there about us, how kind of savage we were and primitive and horrible and needed to be exterminated. And so it, depending on the agenda, we were depicted and sort of categorized in certain ways. And so I think it's really hard, people were fed that all day, every day, in the news, the limited, forms of media at the time. And so that just has embedded itself in American culture, or in North American culture, in the US's culture, because there's South America too. And in a way that it's just hard to extract. It's in the educational system, it's in sort of every walk of life. So yeah, it's just deep in there. And people don't get much more information than that still. It's getting better, but yeah, it's still, it's in the Boy Scouts. It's, these mythologies that have been created about us. That's why, like, in this time period, you hear the term in my communities, about taking back control of the narrative. That's why it's so important. And it's important for people, to be able to understand the real history of this country. That needs to happen. We need to be in control of our own narrative. And that's what's been happening in the Native arts for a long time. Before I showed up, generations before, people were doing that. So I'm trying to continue that, what's been handed on to me. So I'm trying to think back, because it's been a while since I created those works. But in that time period, yeah, I was just really kind of dealing with my identity and my place in the world, uh, coming from a Native community, and then sort of not being in that community at the moment. Yeah, being in sort of these two communities at different times, but also carrying my baseline, sort of foundational identity, which is, from the Tsitsista Sutta, the Northern Cheyenne, AKA Northern Cheyenne, um, into these other communities. So, I've done that my whole life, just sort of, you're back and forth, I mean, that road to, to Lame Deer, to Busby, the road to the res is well worn. I was trying to figure out the other day, like, how much I had traveled that, and yeah, it's a lot. So but yeah, those were trying to, especially between a rock and a hard place. It was this, figuring out that place. Those glass, elements are sort of like, um they're me, they're my identity and my people, kind of suspended between these two worlds. Probably more me, sort of, but there's elements of, back home inside of those. There's dirt, from the reservation spun into that glass. I was working in hot glass at the time in grad school, and I was like, not attracted to the really bright colors, of glass. And so that was the color I grew up with, where was the reds and the yellows from back home, in the painted hills, the Badlands. And so yeah, and I just figured out this, how you roll color into glass like that. So once I rolled it in, it's just sort of made sense, this layer of and connection to that place. So yeah, so I wanted to mix sort of contemporary forms, materials with, this sort of material from my homeland, the rawhide, the um, deer rawhide, and the dirt, and then the rocks, from that part of the world. And this banister from this old house, you know, this sort of colonial old house, that's where we're at, sort of, as Native people, in my estimation, is suspended between these worlds sometimes, but we're fully contained. We know who we are. I know who I am. I was raised to know that, and I'm figuring out more and more all the time. But yeah, so, and yeah, the other piece, culture cache, really this time period when I was casting a lot of bronze and different metals. And yeah, I think just that sort of compartmentalizing of a culture, especially in a museum setting and things like that, that was sort of response to that. And I was working with this figure at the time. I called it a cocoon figure, and that was that form that's attached to the piece, and it's about healing and transition and change, like what happens in a cocoon for a moth or a butterfly. So it's like, yeah, it's sort of that duality again of how you're perceived and how you perceive yourself, and presenting that in those forms. So I think, early on, I just really understood that I needed to express my experience, as a living, Native person, um, and just sort of the decision to do that is a breakthrough, because we're not consulted very often. This history has been created for us, and our identity in a lot of ways has been created for us. So that simple act of expressing my experience, it's crazy that it's that significant. And not just me, but I mean, any Native artist that expresses their experience is doing that, is doing something groundbreaking, because like I said, we've been so defined from the outside. There's a quote from Vine Deloria, the great writer, Native writer, most prolific, Native writer, and such an inspiration to all of us. But he talked about writing, and said that all Natives need to write. He said, we owe it to our survival. Um, and he basically said, I can't remember the whole quote, if you don't do it, someone else will. And so, it's, for it to be, that important, our survival depends on it, I think is something really to think about as Native people, and yeah, just that expression of your experience is gonna contribute so much to both communities, to our community as Native people, and also to the larger community, because they're going to get the truth, about what it's like to live as a Native person in this time period in this country, and what it may have been like to live in the past, and so it fills in so many blanks, and it's just such an important thing to do, to express ourselves, and that experience. And there's so many different experiences, there is not one sort of authentic experience as it has been framed sort of in anthropology sometimes and this and that. I mean, the gamut is huge, 70% of native people live off the reservation, live away from their homelands. So, you know, that experience, how are we navigating, the non-Indian world, the urban settings, what happens, where do we get our strength from? So that's what I look for in my work. I really try to shine a light on that, so that it does fill in that big blank, and I've tried to do it in all these different ways because that's what my relatives in the past did. They weren't, they grabbed whatever they felt was appropriate, medium material wise, and they ran with it, um, and I've spent time in museum collections seeing that play out in these works, and it's a powerful thing. Those are, I look at those works and they have been in at different times defined as primitive and this and that. They're masterworks. These were intellectual masters, that were creating these works. Yeah, it's so powerful. And we need to be in close proximity to those works if we can, because it had such an impact on me being around physically around those works. I mean, it's a complicated thing because it's not easy to do. There's other issues there around these works, being in museum settings and needing to be home. But anyway, so those are the those are some of the issues we're dealing with. Is just sort of breaking through that invisibility that's been sort of placed over us, like this kind of a blanket, and yeah, so we just have to express ourselves, just do it, you know. 2073. No, I was kidding. I predict June 11th, 2073. No, I think it's going to take a long time. I think progress has been made. We're in a better place than we were, uh, 20, 30, 40 years ago. But it is a bit cyclical, especially for Native artists. Sometimes our opportunities to be heard coincide, the demand that's there is around these historical moments, observations, the Columbus Quincentenary, Lewis and Clark, that's when the institutions call on us, and so I'm challenging institutions to call on us every day, instead of just once every whatever 25 years or I don't know when these things happen, but that's when the big calls come. People want to hear what we have to say. So the institutions need to understand, that doesn't work. That's not going to do it. It needs to be a more regular thing. We just need to be part of this, the everyday flow of life, because that's what we're here. We are here, and we are meeting the challenges, and there's a ton of them, but we're still doing it. And it's because we come from good stock. We come from people that they knew how to survive. They knew how to think ahead. They knew how to plan for what was going to happen next. They were just always thinking, So yeah, we're still here. We're still, figuring things out and meeting challenges. And I think, that invisibility, that was created for us is has so permeated this culture that it will take a while, but I think it will eventually come. I think it will. I mean, like right now we have a person, Deb Holland or Hayland, who, is doing some things government wise, that are generating some awareness around the boarding schools and, some things that really need to be talked about, some difficult things that need to be discussed, and a lot of people don't know about. So yeah, it's coming, but it's the way that's going to change the way that's going to get better and we're going to be less invisible is us speaking up, but also other people demanding to hear the truth, to hear what really happened in the past, what we're dealing with today, because it is part of the history of this part of the world, this continent. And that goes for, around the world, the indigenous communities around the world, there needs to be, and there are some, growing strong movements, there have been for a while, that are giving voice to people, so, but also, I would also say the other piece of it is um, for people to think about how to facilitate our voices. In other words, to not speak for us, but give us that opportunity to speak for ourselves, and not sort of to let loose of sort of the control of the mechanisms that get people to, the opportunity to express themselves too, so that we're not always sort of just being called in, but we're also able to have meaningful structures, institutions ourselves that can deliver this message. There are some, but it's always been an interesting, like, the Indian Arts and Crafts Board, that was set up many years ago, and I think in the 20s, that created these Indian museums and stuff. I mean, that was good. That was, I don't decry that at all, but it did push a sort of economic development agenda for the work, and so, it, and this is work that's there for so much more than that. It's a healing thing. This is stuff these are objects and things, powerful things that were there to keep our community together and keep them healthy and keep them, vibrant. So that's what we need to return to is that kind of thing too, and figure out just what this artwork, what its function is in our communities. I mean, I think we already know a lot of that, but it's always changing. Like I said, I just came from powwow. You're just like dunked in artwork. I mean, it's just the regalia, the dance, the music, all of it. It's just like it just connects you to each other and to your past and to your future, and it's just a really, really powerful moment in time. So I think it's important that just for any art exhibition that deals with sort of native content, or bringing different contents together from different cultures. I think it's really important to access, like I said, those voices that are living it, that have lived it, are living it, and to for those voices to be sort of the guiding principle in these efforts, and just sort of letting those voices define that moment in time and that structure of expression in an exhibition, I think is really important. So, we're doing a little bit of everything. We're writing, there's critical response that we're creating. There's, the artwork itself. But, it's to make that native voice comprehensive and throughout the exhibition, I think is really important. And also and also to connect the native community to the experience, to connect those groups that are in the area as much as you can to that experience, because it is, museums are intimidating, to everyone on some level. I mean, they're also, they're educational places, and they're, they have all of that potential, but it's also like, um, helping those communities feel welcome in those spaces, because it's not necessarily a place that we're going to go, first choice, unless there's, Native artists there or work that's compelling to the community. um, so, and that's the thing, is like, these are opportunities for that to happen. These kind of exhibitions are opportunities to get people sort of into your spaces, and help them feel some ownership of the space, um, and so and then it goes back to kind of what we were talking about before, um, just being consistent with it. So it's not just once every 25 years, for the Columbus quincentenary or something. It is, they're seeing it consistently, address what's happening in all communities. And then that feels, um, that feels more like there's in my community and other communities. I don't want to speak for other communities, but in my community, there's been just sort of token gestures at different times, people that were meaning well, but we always tell people, to come back. If you're going to do something in our community, come back and establish a relationship, a long-term relationship, and I think that's really, what, because we were, the anthropologists came in, boom, boom, they were in and out, and we saw and still see sort of like careers exploding out there for people based on maybe a weekend someone spent here, or spent on the res. So it needs to be like this committed, long-term, equal relationship, and that will really make a difference in levels of trust and stuff. It's been a long journey of sort of being exploited, in so many different ways, whether it's cultural appropriation, people just like making money off of our imagery that aren't from our community and appropriating our symbols and all that, or whether it's programs coming in that somebody got a big chunk of change to do a program for us, and never really asked us what we wanted. That happens still, still is happening. So but it is changing. I mean, there are, we are putting things in place, internal review boards and things like that, where we're making those decisions of who gets to do these, to come into our community and all of that. And so yeah, things are changing, and I think I see a change in the museum world as well. It's a slow change. There's more that needs to be done. Absolutely. There needs to be, my other thing is, let's deal with more than just one or two Native artists nationally at a time, and that's what will happen if you make a strong commitment to not just show intermittently the work of Native people, but to do it long term and consistently. So anyway, it's shows like this are really important to kind of connect us as cultural communities. And we've always been connected with the African American community in this country in so many different ways. There's a lot of levels of common experience, commonality, the oppressions were different, but still we all, we both experienced oppression, and we pulled together at different times and tried to help each other out, and yeah, so these shows are important to shine a light on that, the experience of people of color in this country has this oppressive kind of thing over it, consistently across the board. What does that mean? Where's that coming from and why? Um, Not to get too long-winded here, but I mean, you really have to go way back to understand what we're dealing with in this country with, this invisibility piece and all of that. You have to go back to the doctrines of discovery, and I'm going to leave it at that. I would challenge people to look into that, look at those doctrines, because they're still being used today in court cases when it comes to land, and not just in this country, but around the world. They're being referenced. So, it's that's a long way back. So, and that's what we have to do, is be willing to look back and see what's really there, and then we can move forward.